All right, let's do a completely different topic. What would you say are the most fundamental differences between Judaism and the two monotheistic offshoots that came from it, Islam and Christianity? What really separates us in terms of our basic philosophical outlook?
I want to preface my answer with two comments. The first thing I want to say is I'm not an expert on either of those faiths. If only I was an expert even on Judaism, and I wish I knew more about that. And certainly when it comes to commenting on other faiths, anything I say really should be taken with a great degree of caution. The second thing I want to say is that we don't, in Judaism, we don't feel a particular need to, or shouldn't feel a particular need to criticise or bash other faith systems. Ultimately, we don't believe that everyone has to be Jewish. A believer in another faith who's on a genuine spiritual journey and truly and meaningfully trying to engage in a relationship with themselves, with others, with God, trying to do that which is right and good, is a great person. We don't believe that only Jews have access to the world to come and to the world of spiritual reward that we were talking about before. We don't believe everyone has to be Jewish, and therefore certainly, in many respects, we are fellow travellers with any person who is trying to live a good and meaningful and moral life, and certainly with our brethren who are members of other monotheistic faiths. So I think that's an important point to say, and particularly as you alluded to, because many of the beliefs are really beliefs that we share in common, and that values that are common between all three faiths. Having said that, as an outsider to either faith, and I don't really know what Christian or Muslim spirituality feels like from the inside, and therefore I say should be taken with caution, it does appear that there are significant differences. One point that I would bring out is the extent to which the degree to which Judaism is a halachic faith. It believes in actions and practice and law. We never feel that it is enough just to have a moral value. As soon as there's a moral value or a spiritual value, we immediately want to concretize it and put it into action. We won't just speak about the virtues of charity or love. Immediately there'll be halachic, legal discussion. How should one give charity? How much charity should one give? What's the best way of giving it? And who should one give it to? And what about when there's conflicting priorities and different needs that one faces, and how does one balance that? And before you know it, you have a full library, a whole bookshelf of books on the laws of giving charity. So one very significant element of Judaism is that we're sceptical of abstract virtues. We're sceptical of high ideals because we believe they're ephemeral and they just disappear and evaporate. The critics of Judaism often claim that we're obsessed with minutiae and nitty-gritty laws. We're overly focused on those. In fact, to the best of my knowledge, that was perhaps part of Jesus' criticism of Judaism. And many of the breakaways from Orthodox Judaism certainly have been over that focus on halakha. It can be a weakness. You can become someone who is focused just on the technical legalities and loses sight of the inner content. But at its best, the structure of halakha provides a framework that we can and should fill with meaning and content. If one just speaks about charitable values, charity as an abstract, very often it may end up unactualized. It may end up barely giving any charity at all. But in halacha, every Jew, every person should be tithing, should be giving 10%, should be working through their accounts on a yearly basis and checking that they're giving us an amount. So it's immediately concretized and actualized. We say brachot, we say blessings before we eat food. Now it's true that one can just mumble one's way through a blessing and never give it any significance and meaning. But what a wonderful system if we can fill it with meaning, if we can see it as a framework which all too often, sadly, we leave empty. But on occasion, one fills with meaning. And one actually takes this food in one's hands, and before one eats it, one makes a blessing. And one thinks about what the blessing means, that I'm appreciative of this gift, I'm appreciative of this wonderful opportunity, then that's a fantastic thing. So halacha provides a framework. So I think that's the first point. We take abstract ideas and we immediately want to actualize them, and we're skeptical about ideas that are just left in the abstract, which aren't immediately put into practice. So the centrality of law and halacha, I think, is one unique feature. A second unique feature of Judaism is the spirituality we give to human mind and human thinking and human reason. Part of the obligation of being a Jew is to be koveya itim l'Torah, to build time daily, into every day, into every week, into every month, to engage in thought, to engage in thinking about, to wrestling with halachic conundrums, moral conundrums, dealing with situations, sometimes even just theoretical situations, about what is the right and proper way to engage in what it means to be a human being. Every person should have a fixed time in their day, in their weekly routine, in which they are entering, I spoke about this before, the Beit HaMedrash, the academies of learning, the yeshivot and the seats of learning, are going to a shiur or a lecture and are being challenged to think. We see spiritual value in the human mind. We see the human mind as the greatest gift that we've been given as God. We see it as the bridge that helps us conquer that divide between ourselves as physical human beings and that which is godly. And we see spiritual value in thinking about these things. I may have quoted before on JTV a comment that I happened to see in a footnote by a sociologist. She said the only society in which she's aware of in which there's mass learning of adult education, ongoing mass adult education, not talking about an intellectual elite in the Oxbridges of the world, and we're not talking about people in a particular period of their life when they're in university or studying, but ongoing adult education is in Orthodox Jewish world, in which people are very seriously turning up every day or once a week and learning and thinking. So we see spiritual value in engaging in thought and reflection and dealing with issues of morality or self-growth and religious growth and emotional growth. And we see that as a form of human spirituality. So we think that we humans operate on many levels. We humans are spiritual beings. We're emotional, we're intellectual, we're action-based. And the halachic system puts values on actions, and it also puts value on the intellectual, on genuinely and meaningfully struggling to understand what we are meant to be, how we are meant to be, what God wants from us. That's a second unique element of Jewish spirituality. In fact, it's not just about study of spirituality. We see using our minds to challenge God, to question what he wants from us, to partner with him, to create Torah through the application of the principles and values that he's given us and taught us, but then applying human reason to understand it. We see understanding Torah as the greatest fulfillment of spirituality. A Torah law left ununderstood is no true relationship to spirituality. God wants to connect with us, with our minds. Something that we have to do, just because we have to do it and we don't really understand its spiritual content, is a tragedy. It's a missed opportunity. So the serious engagement with partnering with God in creating Torah, it's not just about the study, but it's about realizing that this is a vehicle to insight and understanding of God. That's another element of Jewish spirituality. A third element of Jewish spirituality is that we glory in the world. We think the world we live in is wonderful. We think it's a world, as I've said before, full of the gifts of God, and it's something we're meant to appreciate. I mentioned before, we make a bracha every time we enjoy ourselves, every time we eat some food. Less well known is that we make a bracha when we see an intelligent person. If you meet a scientist, what should a Jew do? They should say a bracha in which we give praise to God for having created such a wonderful thing as a human being who's so blessed with intelligence and has taught us more about the world. So we embrace the world. Judaism does not have a living monastic tradition. It doesn't have a tradition of abstinence. It believes really that the fulfillment of human spirituality is in living a life in which we engage with the world, in which we're productively trying to learn about the world, we're earning a livelihood, trying to produce that which is useful and good for society, in which we're living lives in which we have relationships with spouses, with family, with children. And it doesn't believe that a monastic life in which one doesn't have a life of celibacy is ultimately a good thing, generally speaking. Where do we think that true spirituality lies? It lies in the day-to-day nitty-gritty of interacting with other human beings. It lies in the irritation of constant family life. It lies in the waking up at night to care for a baby. It lies in the care for our elderly relatives. It lies in interactions between spouses, between husbands and wife. That's what we see as true spirituality. And I think that's a third element of that which is unique in Judaism. The value we place on questioning, the value we place on education, the value we place on continuity of being able to give those gifts to our children. The belief that we have in partnering God in the world, that God has created a world in which we need to act decisively, we need to make a difference, I think is another element of unique Jewish spirituality. Judaism is often challenged and said, look what an imperfect world we live in. Why do bad things happen? Why is the world like that? Why wouldn't God create a perfect world? We believe consciously and deliberately God did not create a perfect world. We live in an imperfect world, and we have the responsibility of making that world a little better. So Judaism carries within it a proactive element, an element that we're meant to look at the world, and rather than passively saying this is what the world is, we're meant to say how can we make it a little better. And I think that if we look at Jewish history, we can see how that's played out. We see a people who have so often been expelled, been persecuted, have ended up as refugees. And what do they do when they arrive in the new place? The first thing they do is set up a school for their kids. The Bible already teaches us that. It tells us of Jacob fleeing with his family at a time of famine from the lands of Israel, the land of Canaan, to Egypt, where Joseph, his son, has set up. And it says he sends his son Judah ahead to do what, say the sages? To set up a school. You move to a new area as a penniless refugee from Nazi persecution. You arrive on the shores of the welcoming England or America, or sometimes not so welcoming, and the first thing you do is set up a school, an educational institution. We look at Israel. I remember a few years ago reading how the peace in the Middle East was there was no way to resolve it because there were limited water supplies. And there was no way to allocate. There simply wasn't enough to go around. And we look at Israel that has managed to create desalination plants in which it's able to export water. So the Israelis went in with this very Jewish determination. This is the way we find the land, but it's not the way the land is always going to be. It's like this now, but let's dream about the future. Let's dream about what we can make it. And therefore, dreaming big, I think, is another unique element of Jewish spirituality. Linked to this idea is that we don't adopt fatalism, a fatalistic attitude, as a theological truth. Our approach shouldn't be, inshallah, this is what God wills, and therefore whatever will happen. Quite the contrary. Our approach should be, do we choose to allow it to happen, or do we fight back? Do we make a difference? So I think we don't have the same pacifist or fatalistic attitudes that some other faiths have. I think this is also an aspect of that difference.
To stay up to date with JTV content, click subscribe here if you're on YouTube and hit the alarm bell. And if you're on Facebook, hit the like button and under following, click see first. If you enjoy watching JTV content and want to help us continue to grow, please consider making a donation to us by clicking here.